Today in Duskmourn, we get a blue enchantress, a combo-y 2-drop, and a card that's by far my least favorite from the entire set. Let's break them down. Hello everyone, it's Seth, probably better known as Saffron Olive, and it's time for another daily dose of Duskmourn spoilers. And we're creeping towards the end of spoiler season. We should have the full set by the end of the week, Thursday or Friday, but today we still have a ton of cards to talk about, which means we should probably jump right into it, start talking interesting new Duskmourn cards. Before we do, a couple of quick reminders. First, if you need any of these cards, you can snag them from our sponsor Card Kingdom over at cardkingdom.com/MTGGoldfish. Second, to keep up on all the latest previews throughout the day, you should head on over to MTGpreviews.com. Anyway, let's talk some Duskmourn. First up today, we have one of the combo-iest creatures that Wizards, I think, has ever made in Marvin, Murderous Mimic. So Marvin, 2-mana 2/2, legendary artifact toy creature. And then it says it has all the activated abilities of creatures you control that don't have the same name as this creature. So as a fair card, Marvin, obviously horrible, right? It's a legendary grizzly bear that dies to artifact destruction, but that's fine, because that's not really what Marvin's about. Marvin isn't about attacking and blocking and playing fair magic. Marvin's just a straight up combo piece, and there's about a million different ways to go infinite with this card. So how do you go infinite with Marvin? First, and the easiest way to do it, is have a creature on the battlefield that has an ability that can untap itself. So in Standard, we have Sleep Curse Fairy. Pay 2, untap it. So that'll give us a Marvin that can pay 2 to untap itself. And then we need a creature that can tap to make more mana than it costs to untap Marvin. So we have like Cameo of Whispered Hopes. Taps to make mana equal to its power. So with just those two cards, Marvin doesn't quite go infinite. It goes infinite, but only tapping and untapping itself. You tap it for 2, untap it for 2, do it again, do it again. But if we can grow Marvin's power by 1 with like an Agatha's Soul Cauldron, then we have a Marvin that taps for 3 and then untaps for 2, giving us infinite mana. And one of the reasons this is exciting is we've already seen some Agatha's Soul Cauldron, Sleep Curse Fairy, Cameo of Whispered Hopes combos, because they go infinite with each other. So now Marvin gives that deck a really big boost of power. It gives you a backup Soul Cauldron that doesn't care about the graveyard to get around Leyline of the Void and Rest in Peace and all that stuff. So super excited to see if this can maybe make Sleep Curse Fairy Cameo combo into a real thing in Standard. Once you get back to older formats, there's a ton of different ways to essentially do the same infinite mana combo. Cards like Horseshoe Crab can untap itself. Pilly Pala might be one of the best. For 2 mana, you untap it and you make a mana. So let's say we have a Palladium Mirror. Taps to make 2 mana, and we have a Pilly Pala, untaps for 2 mana to make a mana of any color. We have a Marvin that can tap itself with Palladium Mirror's ability, then untap itself with Pilly Pala's ability to make a mana of any color. We make infinite mana of any combination of colors. Or maybe Horseshoe Crab, untaps for 1 blue. Bloom Tender, taps to make a mana for each color of permanent we control. So we tap Marvin for 2, untap it for 1, infinite mana. Devoted Druid with Channeler Initiate. Channeler Initiate taps and removes a counter from itself to make a mana of any color. Devoted Druid untaps itself by putting a -1/-1 counter on it. So we can tap the Marvin to make a mana, untap it with a counter, back and forth, infinite mana. So there's a bunch of different ways to make infinite mana with Marvin, but it keeps getting better. There's infinite damage combos. So the easiest way to get infinite damage with Marvin, and this I think is actually pretty exciting for Commander because it's all colorless. So you can play this in a deck where Marvin's your commander, but it's something like Triskelion and Walking Ballista with Phyrexian Devourer. Phyrexian Devourer lets us exile the top card of our library to put a +X counter on it, where X was the card's mana value. That's been errata to be X +1/+1 counters rather than 1 +X counter. So essentially, if we can get a Walking Ballista or Triskelion, which can remove a counter from itself to deal a damage in a Phyrexian Devourer, we can exile the top card of our deck, get some counters on Marvin, remove those counters to deal damage, do it again, win the game on the spot. And remember, you can do this all with Marvin as your commander. There's also infinite mill combos, Mirror Mad Phantasm, this super wonky creature that for 2 mana shuffles itself into your library, and then you reveal cards until you reveal a card named Mirror Mad Phantasm, and you mill all the rest of the cards. The trick here is, if we give Marvin Mirror Mad's Phantasm ability, then there's no Mirror Mad Phantasm in our deck when we activate Marvin, so it's literally just gonna mill our entire deck, and then we Thassa's Oracle for the win. There's infinite exiling your opponent's deck's combos like Omen Hawker, taps to make 2 mana for abilities, Nakshaw Click, untap taps for 2 mana to exile the top card of your opponent's library. So essentially you just use Marvin, you tap it to make the mana, untap it with Next Shot Click's ability, exile the top card of your opponent's deck, win the game by milling your opponent out. In Commander, I think this is mostly a card for weird commanders that specifically care about activated abilities, like Trazan the Infinite, but I also think it's kind of a neat card in any colorless deck, because colorless decks, they tend to be these ramp decks, right? If you've ever played a colorless commander deck, they mostly do one thing, which is like play a ton of mana rocks, try to ramp into Eldrazi, other big colorless things. The thing I like about Marvin is this is a colorless commander that is very different. It's essentially a colorless combo commander, and you can either play this as your commander, and I think this will be one of the more popular colorless commanders just because it's so unique compared to all the rest of the colorless commanders, but it's also a way you can slot a backdoor combo into your Surge Injure deck, or your Liberator deck, so your Traxios deck, so you slot in the like Walking Ballista, Phyrexian Devourer thing, and you have this backup plan where you can do the typical colorless ramp a bunch and cast your big stuff, but you also have a way to just infinite combo will. So Marvin Murderous Mimic, the card's pretty awesome. I'm actually kind of surprised that they printed this effect on such an efficient creature that's even colorless, so you can play in any single deck. So I think this card's actually really, really sweet. The thing I will say is if you look at all the combos we talked about, they're all 3-card combos. So I'm not really expecting Marvin is going to suddenly be like S tier in Modern or something. Traditionally, 3-card combos are more like semi-competitive against the odds combos than top-tier Splinter Twin style combos or whatever, but I still think the card could have some competitive ramifications as a combo piece. Worst case, it's going to be a super fun against the odds style build around because there's just so many ways this card goes infinite. Next up, we got a pretty interesting new green sorcery in Valgavoth's Onslaught. So it's green and double X, and it says manifest red X times, then put X+1/+1 counters on each of those creatures. So Valgavoth's Onslaught, this card's actually kind of ridiculous if you can get enough mana for it. If you think through the math on this, for 1 mana, it does nothing. Well, I guess it puts a sorcery in your graveyard for Delirium, but outside of that, it does nothing. For 3 mana, you get a 3/3. You get a 2/2 and put a counter on it. For 5 mana, you get 2 4/4s. For 7 mana, you get 3 5/5s. For 9 mana, you get 4 6/6s. So once you get up to 7 or 9 mana, which admittedly is a lot of mana, but this card becomes really, really good on rate. And remember, manifest redding is better than just making a token or whatever, because it's kind of like hide in plain sight. You get to put these cards into play face down from your library. So maybe you're hitting something that you want to flip up in the future and get even more value out of. Worst case, manifest red kind of surveils because it lets you look at the top 2 cards of your deck. One goes into play face down, the other goes in your graveyard. So it's a way that you can kind of control your draws a little bit. You can fill your graveyard if you have graveyard synergies. So I think Valgavoth's Onslaught, as I talked about before, it scales really well once you get to high mana values. So a 3 mana 3/3, even one that kind of surveils a card into your graveyard, isn't especially playable. Like, we have viral spawning right now in Standard, hasn't really seen any play. So I think just manifesting one thing for 3 mana, not gonna be good enough. If you get to 5 mana, it's kind of okay. It's like a twist on Invoked Agents, much easier to cast because you don't need all the green mana, but your creatures are actually a little bit worse. You get 4 4s instead of 4 5s with abilities. Once you get up to 7 mana, you're kind of getting a World Spine Worm Death Trigger. Once you get to 9 mana or more, you pretty much just win the game if your opponent doesn't have a Wrath. So it's gonna be very interesting to see just how good this card really is. I feel like it has potential to be really strong, but then we had to invoke the Ancients in Standard forever, and it never really caught on, even though it had so much power to the battlefield. One of the things I love about this card is that we're not just making tokens. It's way better than that, because we're putting actual things from our deck into play, which means if we're hitting creatures, we can theoretically get some massive creature face down as manifest red, and then use Unyielding Gatekeeper to flip it up, a Hauntwood Shrieker to flip it up. We could use another round to blink our entire team, flip everything face up. So there's some shenanigans there as well. An interesting comparison, and I don't know if this really holds, but Herd Migration is kind of a staple in the domain decks. And obviously Herd Migration, part of the reason for this is the ability to discard it for 2 mana, gain some life, get a basic land. Valgavoth's Onslaught, not going to do that, although it has another upside. We can just cast it for 3 mana to manifest red, get a 3/3, get a card into the grave graveyard, but once you get up to like 7 mana, I think this is almost comparable, right? Herd Migration for 7 mana is going to make most likely 5 3/3s. Valgavoth's Onslaught for 7 mana is going to make 3 5/5, so the amount of power you're adding to the battlefield is actually exactly the same as a fully powered Herd Migration, plus you have the chance of casting this for 5 mana, or 9 mana, or 11 mana, and getting even more value out of it. So I think on rate this card might be playable. There's also face down synergies, even outside of like blinking your stuff face up. We have all the stuff from Murderous at Karlov Manor, like Yaris Roar the Old Gods, that really just wants a bunch of face down creatures to draw us a bunch of cards, so maybe we can see some sort of cloak or morph or disguise style deck, now with Manifest Threat added in too, being actually good in Standard thanks to this new support. Also, as I mentioned, you're filling the graveyard with this card, so it's kind of a cute way. Like, I want to build a deck that's Reanimator, but also trying to like blink up an Itali that we Manifest Red, where we're able to like Valgavoth's Onslaught. If we have a setup where we can like blink one of our face down creatures, we just manifest the Itali or the Atraxa, and then we blink it, get all the value out of it. If we don't have a way to blink it, we can just mill it in the graveyard and try to reanimate it with Cruelty of Gix or something. So there's actually a ton of super cool synergies for this cards. As far as Commander goes, I think there's 2 primary homes for this card. So I could see an argument, and this isn't one of the 2 homes, but I could see an argument that if you're a green deck that's just making a huge amount of mana, I guess you could just play this for value, because as we've been talking about, once you get up to like 9, 11, 13, 15 mana, this card actually just adds a ridiculous amount of power to the battlefield, like a huge amount of power. So it scales really well, and green is really good at making a ton of mana in Commander. So I could see an argument if you just want to play this in a green ramp deck kind of for fun. I think that's actually going to be perfectly fine. Sure, they all still die to a Wrath or whatever, but it does add enough power to the battlefield that that's a realistic plan. But I think the primary home is going to be face down decks like Kadena Slinking Sorcerer or Crossed Eye of the Glade or Vanifar Evolved Enigma, commanders that are specifically about face down creature shenanigans, or maybe X-Spell decks like Zeraxa or Roshin Roaring Prophet. Seems really good there as well. So Valgavoth's Onslaught, the card actually seems just really good on rate. We'll have to see if it actually catches on in Standard, but I feel like if you can make enough mana, the math actually kind of lines up for this card to just win the game because it adds so much power to the battlefield. Plus you get all those sweet shenanigans we've been talking about. We also got our red enduring creature in Enduring Courage. So Enduring Courage, 4 mana 3/3 enchantment creature Dog Glimmer. It says whenever another creature you control enters, it gets +2/+0 and gains haste until end of turn. And then when it dies, if it was a creature, return it to the battlefield under its owner's control. It's an enchantment, not a creature. So Enduring Courage, if this card looks kind of familiar, it's literally Ogre Battle Driver. If you've been playing Magic for a while, you might remember like a decade ago now, Ogre Battle Driver was in Standard. It's actually the exact same card, except it has a different creature type, doesn't come back as an enchantment. But Battle Driver actually saw a decent amount of play in its Standard. If you've really been playing for a long time, In the Web of War is essentially the enchantment version of this creature. Once Enduring Courage dies, you get the Web of War, so it's a pretty powerful effect. Like giving every creature that you play +2/+0 in haste can deal a huge amount of damage if you're willing to build around it. So first off, even though this is a red card, it's not a card that you really want to play in the traditional mono red deck. If you're playing a bunch of Heartfire Heroes, Swift Spears, Slickshot Show-Offs, this super low to the ground red decks, Enduring Courage is just too slow, right? You don't want this 4-drop that then needs you to play more creatures after it to really get any value out of it. So I'd be surprised if this super aggro red decks in Standard really wanted Enduring Courage. On the other hand, if you remember the big red deck that we played, that's where Enduring Courage can be absurd. Like, imagine playing Enduring Courage, and then the next turn, playing a Dragonhawk. You get the Dragonhawk, you exile some cards, maybe you cast them, maybe you deal some damage, and then you can immediately attack with the Dragonhawk for 7, thanks to the pump and the haste from Enduring Courage, which will then exile even more cards and deal even more damage. Like, there's a reasonable chance that Enduring Courage and the Dragonhawk will just straight up close out the game. It is a huge amount of damage. You also got stuff like Terror of the Peaks, works really well with the red Overlord. You can play it, deal 4 damage to something, immediately haste it in, attack for 7, deal 4 more damage to something. So those kind of decks, I think, is where Enduring Courage is going to be at its best. Some sort of big red deck where rather than trying to play as many 1 and 2 drops as possible, instead you're trying to get to like 4, 5, 6 mana and use Enduring Courage with these really powerful attack trigger creatures. It also is sneaky good with Smuggler's Surprise. If you've seen the Smuggler's Surprise deck in Standard, it's all about trying to dump these big like Vaultborn Tyrants and Calamities into play play. Enduring Courage lets the deck close out the game much faster. One of the problems with Smuggler's Surprise is you can do all this surprise stuff and then still get got by like a Sunfall or something, but if you have an Enduring Courage out and put like double Vaultborn Tyrant into play, you probably just win the game. Like, you get these huge, trampling, hasty creatures gonna smash in for so much damage. So I'm interested to try it there as well. It also works really well with tokens. Like, imagine Season of the Burrow. Season of the Burrow for 5 mana can make 5 1/1s, which by itself is kind of like, okay, whatever, I get a bunch of bodies. But if you have Enduring Courage out, each of those 1/1s is actually going to be a 3/2 haster. That is potentially 15 damage coming at your opponent with one big attack, or maybe Form a Posse, these Expel token creators. Enduring Courage really, really good there too. So I think there are definitely uses for this card in Standard. Plus, we haven't even really gotten to the upside that if your opponent kills it, it comes back as an enchantment, and you can still do all these shenanigans. As far as Commander is concerned, the obvious use for this is going to be playing in decks that already were playing Ogre Battle Driver, where this is really just an upgraded version since it comes back as an enchantment. So these are usually decks that really care about haste, like Samut, Vizier of Nakamon, that draws you a bunch of cards as you hit with haste creatures, or Delina Wildmage really wants haste so we can attack and start doing its thing. Also, it's a dog, which is another twist compared to Ogre Battle Driver, so it seems cute in like any dog deck. Rin and Siri, Teshek. Rin and Siri probably the best home because it makes all these dog and cat tokens, and all those tokens rather than 1/1s are going to be hasty 3/1s thanks to Enduring Courage. The other possibility is maybe this is enough of an upgrade that it's actually just good enough in token style decks. Like, imagine this with Krenko Mob Boss, where you tap Krenko and make a huge amount of goblins, and rather than just being 1/1s that you gotta untap with, they're hasty 3/1s that smash in for a ton of damage. Or like Perforos. Perforos really wants you to play all these token producers to trigger its 2 damage ability. You're gonna close out the game super fast if all of your tokens are not just hitting for 2 with Perforos, but also smashing in with haste thanks to Enduring Courage. So I think there's quite a few uses for this card. So Enduring Courage, I really like this card. I like that it's a powerful red card that doesn't just go into the like Slick Shot Show Off, Heartfire Hero decks. It kind of pushes you in a different direction. So I think it's a card that can definitely see play in Standard, and it has some homes in Commander. Next up, we get a blue human scout in Essence Tracker. So Essence Tracker, 3 mana 2/3. It has flash, and then it has Eerie. So whenever an enchantment you control enters, or whenever you fully unlock a room, draw a card. So before we talk about this as a Magic card, little mini rant here. So I gotta say, the monster art from Duskmourn is some of my favorite art that Wizards has made in a long, long time. Like, all the creepy bad things in this set look amazing. On the other hand, the more we've seen the humans in this set and like the survivors in this set, I kind of don't really like them. They look kind of cheesy to me. Like, for some reason, these people, here's my problem with this. These people are in an infinite house of horrors, an endless house of horrors, and we've seen the monsters and the demons, and they're super scary. But most of the time, they look like they're in the halls of their high school or something, like super 80s people doing Breakfast Club or whatever. They don't look especially scared or like beaten down, or like you're in a Duskmourn, you're in this really creepy house of horrors with all these demons. Why are you just like talking on your 80s cell phone and chilling? Like, so I don't know. The humans aren't really doing it for me. I feel like glowing hockey sticks in 80s tech is like the Duskmourn version of cowboy hats or detective hats. Like, it's almost so forced it's kind of a meme, and maybe that's partly intentional because this is a set based on horror movies, and if you watch an 80 horrors movie, a lot of those people are super cheesy, so maybe they're trying to go super cheesy intentionally as like a meta joke. But I will say, I don't really like, in general, the human/survivor aesthetic in this. It's not even the pieces of art. It's not like I think the artist did a bad job. It's more like the direction of it just is really cheesy, kind of like the cowboy hats in Outlaws of Thunder Junction, or detective hats in Murders of Karlov Manor. But anyway, rant aside, Essence Tracker is a notable card for one reason, which is it is, I believe, unless I'm missing something, the first ever mono blue enchantress. So an enchantress is a creature which draws a card when you play an enchantment. The best is probably Sethis, but also mono white gets them, Mesa Enchantress, or at least used to. It's been a while since we've had a mono white enchantress. Green has the most of them, like Cetessan Champion. In Essence Tracker, It's this, but in blue, which is pretty interesting because blue's just never really had this effect before. The easiest comparison is it's literally Citizen Champion, except rather than getting a +1/+1 counter when an enchantment comes into play along with drawing a card, the upside you get with Essence Tracker is you can flash it in, and I guess the upside of maybe you unlock a room, I think that's kind of flavor text-ish. Like, sure, there's going to be some times when you unlock a room and get a card out of it, but in reality, a lot of the rooms are so expensive that you're going to be generating more card advantage by just casting another cheap enchantment than paying like 6 or 7 mana to fully unlock a room and draw more cards. So I think that's kind of like a fringe upside. The real deal is whenever you have an enchantment come into play and you have this card, you're going to get to draw a card. So what do we do with this in Standard? So first, you could try to build a flash deck. The flash text on Essence Tracker has been really interesting. Like, I'm not really sure why that's on there. It's certainly an upside, but I was like, how am I playing this? Most enchantments are played at sorcery speed, so what's the upside of me flashing in my enchantress? I guess I leave my mana up for a counter spell and then flash it in end step, then I untap and cast some enchantments and draw cards. I guess that's kind of cool, but there's also like some flash support with enchantments in Standard, like Heliod Radiant Dawn. The front side works really well with enchantments because it is an enchantment, it returns one from your graveyard, and then once you flip it around, it just lets you cast all your spells with flash and gives you a discount for each card that your opponent's drawn. So this lets you kind of play this weird enchantment flash game where you can play an enchantress deck almost like a weird Drago control deck where you can flash in your enchantress, you can flash in all your other spells with Heliod, plus there's like Leyline Binding, Lost in the Maze, other enchantments with flash. So maybe there's some weird enchantress flash control deck in Standard. It also is fine in just like a traditional enchantress style deck. So we still have Calyx in Standard, really good with enchantments. We have Virtue of Knowledge, which is an enchantment Panharmonicon, so it's going to double trigger all of our enchantress triggers, so we're going to draw a ridiculous amount of cards. Plus, we have all the room enchantments, and as I mentioned before, I don't think you're really like trying to pay 7 with Fractured Realm to fully open the room and draw a card, but it is nice that you have all these enchantments that are split cards and offer you all this flexibility, where in the early game you can play them in the cheap and draw a card with Essence Tracker, and then in the late game you get a much more powerful effect with the expensive half. So I think there's a chance that we see some sort of blue-white or maybe Bant Enchantress / room deck develop in Standard. It also seems really good with Prophetic Memory. This seems like a good payoff if you want to go mono blue enchantress. Prophetic Memory just wants you to draw a ton of cards. Essence Tracks are gonna draw you a ton of cards. You make a creature huge, you smash in for a ton of damage and win the game. The other place that this is really relevant is in Commander, and we were talking yesterday about how I really liked that Nasty Searcher in the Dark gave us an enchantress commander that was in Dimir, which is something we've never really had before. Well, now Essence Tracker gives us an enchantress for the Dimir Nashi enchantment deck, which is something we just didn't have before. So if you're playing a Dimir Enchantress deck, or even like Esper, like Zur or Arnid Kennerid or Alayla, you get like a white Enchantress, Mesa Enchantress, but there's very few white Enchantresses. It's primarily a green thing. So I think Essence Tracker is a huge deal for non-green enchantment decks because you just don't have many Enchantress effects to draw you cards, and those are some of the most important effects in an enchantment deck because it keeps you churning through your deck and finding all your action. I also think you just play this in green enchantment decks. If you're playing Galea or Ivy or Tetsuva or Astrid, it's just another Enchantress, and we haven't reached the point, I don't think, of like critical mass where there's so many Enchantresses you just can't play some of the good ones, and I think this is good enough to make the cut because you know what's better than having a Enchantress in your Astrid or Tetsuva deck is having 2 Enchantresses or 3 Enchantresses, so every enchantment that you cast is drawing you 2 or 3 cards. So Essence Tracker offers some nice redundancy there as well. So Essence Tracker, doing a little bit too well art-wise for being in a House of Horror, but the card itself I think is pretty sweet. I'm excited to brew around it in Standard and see if this could make an Enchantress deck playable. Plus, being blue opens up some possibilities in other formats. Moving into the realm of lower rarity cards. Wizards. We have Withering Torment. So Withering Torment, 3 mana, instant. It's a black card. It says destroy target creature. You lose 2 life. Actually, I left out a word there. Destroy target creature or enchantment, and you lose 2 life. And I gotta say, I absolutely hate this card. I hate it. I hate it. And I'm not even kidding here. I'm not even kidding. I really strongly dislike Black getting enchantment removal. If I had my way, Black would not be able to remove enchantments at all. If you don't know the history of this, for the first 25 years of Magic, Black was not allowed to kill enchantments, and then that changed about 5 years ago, where Wizards decided they were going to change the color pie and start giving Black enchantment removal. Wizards' official reasoning is that 3 colors could kill artifacts, but only 2 could kill enchantments, so there was an imbalance that they were trying to fix. I don't really buy it because that imbalance had existed for 25 years as Magic grew and thrived, so I don't know why it was actually a problem 5 years ago. Actually, I do know, I think, why it was a problem 5 years ago, which is Commander became really big, and mono black players got salty that they couldn't kill an enchantment, so Wizards decided to change the color pie to accommodate mono black Commander players. That's my take on it. That's not official Wizards reasoning. So Withering Torment, I don't really like that this card exists. Right now, the best Black enchantment removal is Feed the Swarm, and I know Feed the Swarm in 60 card formats, not a great card. It occasionally sees like fringe sideboard play or has at various points in the past, but really 2 mana, blow up an artifact or enchantment your opponent controls, lose like if equal to the permanent's mana value at sorcery speed, hasn't been that great in Constructed. In Commander, Feed the Swarm is the 4th most played Black card in the entire format. This is like alongside Demonic Tutors and Vampiric Tutors is like the strongest Black cards ever played. Feed the Swarm is right there. That's how heavily played it is in Commander. And I will say Withering Torment is an upgrade. In Commander in specific, instant speed and only losing 2 life rather than life equal to the permanent's mana value is a huge upgrade for this card. This is the new best Black enchantment removal, and if you're playing a mono black deck or a Dimir deck or a Rakdos deck, this is staple level removal. If Feed the Swarm is staple level removal, Withering Torment is that plus for Commander decks. So this card is going to see a ton of play. In Standard, I don't think this card actually has that many uses. Like I said, I think it's like Feed the Swarm, where sure, maybe you're like some super heavy Black deck. You want to play Meat Hook Massacre, so you can't splash into another color. Maybe if you really feel like you got to kill an enchantment, you play this in your sideboard, but this is not going to replace Go for the Throats and Cut Downs and Shoot the Sheriffs and so forth. So in 60 card formats, it's not really a big deal. In Commander though, like I said, I think if you're any mono black deck, you play this card. If you're a Rakdos deck, you probably play this card, because red also really bad at killing enchantments. If you're a Dimir deck, you play this card, because blue also can't kill enchantments. So this is going to be probably the most heavily played Commander card from the entire set, and I would argue that this is... Bear with me, I don't know how people are going to take this comparison, but this is essentially the Black Generous Gift, or the Black Beast Within. Yes, it doesn't literally deal with everything. Yes, rather than giving your opponent a 3/3, you lose a couple of life, but this is as close as Black gets to having a Generous Gift or a Beast Within, and I think it should be treated as such in Commander, where you just play this, if you're not in white or green, you just play this card essentially every single time is your best catch-all answer. So I will say, even though, in my perfect world, Black doesn't get to kill enchantments, like the first 25 years of Magic, if Black does need to kill enchantments, and I'm willing to admit that maybe I'm wrong, and maybe Wizards is right, and that Black should be able to kill enchantments, I still don't like Withering Torment, because I feel like it's too close to being the good white or green enchantment removal. It's too close to Generous Gift. It's too close to Beast Within, where I'm kind of comfortable with Black enchantment removal. Again, granting that I'm wrong and it should exist at all, which I still personally don't agree with, but I'm more comfortable with like Pharika's Libation. 3 mana, each opponent sacks a creature, or target opponent sacks a creature, or target opponent sacks an artifact, or like Shatter the Oath, 5 mana sorcery, destroy a creature enchantment, put a wicked roll on something. I want my Black enchantment removal to be noticeably severely weaker than the other colors. Like, I don't want it to be, oh, it's like a murder essentially. It's already a pretty good removal spell, but it also get enchantments. So I feel like that's where Withering Torment fails for me. If Black does need enchantment removal, I think it should be worse than this. So Withering Torment, my little rant aside, I don't like the card. I don't think it should exist. That said, I'm also a hypocrite, and I'm going to put it in every Black deck because it is the right thing to do, because it is the best answer to enchantments in Black. So even though I think the card shouldn't exist, it's going to see a ton of Commander play. Curious what you think. Give me your feedback. Do you like Black heavy enchantment removal? What do you think of the power of Withering Torment? Is the comparison to Generous Gift and Beast Within fair? How strong in this card? How much are you going to play it in 60 card formats or in Commander? Let me know what you're thinking in the comments. Cruising through the rest of the low rarity cards, we got Midnight Mayhem, a 4-mana Boros sorcery that says create 3 1/1 red gremlin creature tokens, and gremlins you control gain menace, lifelink, and haste until end of turn. So this one, I want to shout out just because it reminds me a little bit of Heroic Reinforcements, and Heroic Reinforcements actually saw a lot of standard play. I wonder if Midnight Mayhem could do the same thing. So it doesn't pump your entire team, which is a drawback, although Menace, Lifelink, and Haste is pretty nice for all of your gremlins, and it does kind of play well with like the Convoke theme if you're just trying to like flood the board with a bunch of bodies and get in a bunch of damage. So I think it could maybe serve a purpose in the right deck in standard. We also got Unable to Scream, 1 blue mana, enchant a creature, then enchanted creature loses all abilities and is a toy artifact creature with base power toughness of 0 in addition to its other types, and if it's a face down creature, it can't be turned face up. So Unable to Scream, it's essentially Witness Protection, but the Duskmourn version. In Witness Protection is a card I actually played quite a bit in some blue decks because blue is not really good at answering creatures on the battlefield, and I think Unable to Scream is arguably as strong or potentially even stronger than Witness Protection. So I don't think this is a staple, but if you're a mono blue deck and you just need to have a way to deal with that Shieldred that's draining out of the game or whatever, Unable to Scream might actually be one of the best ways to get that done. We also got Optimistic Scavenger, 1 mana 1/1. When an enchantment you control enters, or whenever you fully unlock a room, put a +1/+1 counter on target creature. So Optimistic Scavenger kind of reminds me of Pious Wayfarer, where whenever you play an enchantment, you get to pump something. The upside is it's a permanent buff, right? It's a +1/+1 counter rather than a temporary buff. And Pious Wayfarer actually saw play in enchantment aggro decks back when it was in standard, and this seems like a pretty big upgrade. So if there's some sort of room aggro or enchantment aggro deck, I could certainly see Optimistic Scavenger being in it. Also true of Gremlin Tramer, which is another eerie card that might be good enough for constructed play. 2 mana Azorius 2/2, but when an enchantment you control enters, or whenever you fully unlock a room, create a 1/1 gremlin creature token. This reminds me of Clarion Spirit. I don't know if you remember Clarion Spirit, the 2-drop that whenever you do your second card for the turn, you made a 1/1, I think it was a flying token, so the token was a little bit better, but that actually saw a lot of play. Gremlin Tamer, even better, there's no once per turn restriction or anything, so if you play this and start slinging a bunch of enchantments, this can add a lot of bodies to the battlefield super quickly. Of course, also a bunch of draft chaff that you can check out over on MTGPreviews.com. Anyway, that brings us to the end of our daily Duskmourn spoilers for today. So, what do you think about these cards? What do you think about our black enchantment removal? What do you think about our new enduring creature? Let me know what you're thinking in the comments. Thanks for watching, everyone. I hope you enjoyed it, and I'll be back tomorrow with even more Duskmourn spoilers. So until then, have a spectacular day, everyone, and I will talk to you soon. Looking for even more magic? Well, check out yesterday's spoiler video here, or maybe the Against the Odds, where we taught some arena zoomers about owls and creature locks.